Avoidants rarely experience genuine remorse or offer authentic apologies during relationships because their psychological defense mechanisms are designed to minimize emotional pain and avoid accountability for their impact on others. However, there are four specific circumstances that can crack through their emotional armor and force them to confront the reality of what they've lost and the role they played in losing it. 1. They experience total emotional isolation and cannot find a replacement for what you provided. The first circumstance that forces avoidants to confront their mistakes occurs when they experience complete emotional isolation and discover that the specific combination of emotional support, understanding, and acceptance you provided cannot be replicated elsewhere. This realization typically happens 6 to 18 months after losing you, when the novelty of independence has worn off and they've exhausted attempts to find someone else who can tolerate their emotional limitations while providing consistent emotional availability. The isolation they experience goes beyond simple loneliness. It's the profound recognition that they've lost their primary source of emotional regulation and security. Throughout your relationship, you likely served as their secure base, providing emotional stability during stressful periods, consistent support during challenges, and unconditional acceptance despite their emotional unavailability. This support was so seamlessly provided that they took it for granted until it was permanently removed. Their attempts to replace what you provided typically fail because most people expect reciprocal emotional investment in relationships. Other potential partners either demand the kind of emotional availability that triggers their avoidant defenses, or they're equally emotionally distant and cannot provide the secure base function that you fulfilled. This failure to find adequate replacement forces them to acknowledge that what you provided was rare and valuable. The emotional isolation also strips away the distractions that previously prevented them from processing their attachment needs. Without your consistent presence providing background emotional security, they're forced to confront their own emotional emptiness and need for connection. This confrontation often triggers genuine appreciation for what they lost and recognition of their role in destroying it. During this phase, they often experience physical symptoms of loss, sleep disturbances, appetite changes, difficulty concentrating, and general malaise that they cannot attribute to external circumstances. These symptoms force them to acknowledge that losing you created a genuine emotional disruption that contradicts their narrative about not needing emotional connection. The isolation becomes particularly acute during stress, illness, or major life challenges when they instinctively reach for the emotional support you used to provide, only to remember that it's no longer available. These moments of automatic reaching for absent support create sharp awareness of what they've lost and often trigger the first genuine regret about their behavior. Their social connections often prove inadequate for providing the kind of emotional support you offered because friends and family members typically don't provide the same level of unconditional availability and understanding that romantic partners can offer. This inadequacy highlights how much emotional labor you provided and how irreplaceable that contribution actually was. The competitive aspect also emerges when they observe your life continuing and potentially improving without them. Seeing you build relationships, achieve goals, and appear happy without their presence forces them to question their assumption that they were doing you a favor by leaving or that you were too dependent on them for your own good. Most importantly, the isolation forces them to sit with their own emotional reality without the buffer of your presence managing their emotional temperature. This direct confrontation with their own emotional needs and limitations often creates the first genuine self-reflection about their relationship patterns and their role in losing something valuable. When this isolation-driven recognition occurs, their apology typically includes specific acknowledgement of what you provided, recognition that their behavior was hurtful and destructive, and genuine regret about losing you. However, it's crucial to evaluate whether this recognition has motivated actual personal growth work or simply created temporary emotional distress. that will fade once they find new sources of emotional supply. 2. They face a major life crisis and realize they need genuine partnership. The second circumstance that can force avoidants to recognize their mistakes occurs when they face significant life crises, serious illness, family emergencies, career disasters, or major losses that overwhelm their capacity for independent management and force them to confront their need for genuine partnership and emotional support. These crises strip away their usual coping mechanisms and reveal the fundamental human need for connection and support that they've spent their lives denying. When facing overwhelming challenges alone, they often experience visceral recognition of how much easier and more manageable life's difficulties are when you have someone who genuinely cares about your well-being and is willing to provide practical and emotional support. The crisis forces them to confront the difference between surface-level social connections and deep partnership. Friends and acquaintances may offer sympathy and occasional help, but they cannot provide the consistent, reliable support that comes from someone who is genuinely invested in your well-being and future. This contrast highlights what they lost when they chose independence over partnership. Major health scares often serve as particularly powerful catalysts because they force avoidants to confront their own mortality and vulnerability. The prospect of facing serious illness, surgery, or recovery alone can create profound regret about pushing away someone who would have provided care and support during their most vulnerable moments. Financial crises or career disasters can also trigger recognition because they reveal how much practical and emotional support you provided during stressful periods. When facing major challenges alone, they often remember how you helped them process decisions, provided perspective during difficult times, or simply offered emotional comfort when they were overwhelmed. Family emergencies, death of parents, illness of siblings, or other family crises often force avoidants to confront their own emotional needs and the value of having someone who understands their family dynamics and can provide support during grief and stress. The absence of your support during these crucial times often creates sharp awareness of what partnership actually means. The crisis also forces them to confront their own emotional limitations and their need for someone who can help them process complex emotions. During major life challenges, their usual strategies of emotional suppression and independence become inadequate, forcing them to recognize the value of having a partner who can help them navigate emotional complexity. Legal problems, divorce proceedings, or other major life disruptions often reveal how much they depended on your emotional stability and practical support for maintaining their own equilibrium. When their life becomes chaotic, they often realize how much your presence contributed to their ability to handle stress and maintain perspective. The timing of these recognitions is often crucial. They typically occur when the crisis forces them to slow down and reflect on their life and relationships rather than staying busy with distractions. Hospital stays, mandatory rest periods, or forced isolation often create the space for genuine self-reflection about their relationship choices. When crisis-driven recognition occurs, their apology often includes acknowledgement that they undervalued what you provided, recognition that they were wrong about not needing partnership, and genuine regret about facing major challenges alone when they could have had your support. This type of recognition is often more genuine than isolation-driven regret because it's based on concrete understanding of partnership's value rather than just missing emotional comfort. 3. They watch you build an amazing life without them and feel genuine loss. The third circumstance that forces avoidants to recognize their mistakes occurs when they witness you building an exceptional life without them, achieving goals, forming meaningful relationships, and demonstrating happiness and fulfillment that clearly doesn't depend on their presence. This observation creates cognitive dissonance that challenges their assumptions about your emotional dependency and forces them to recognize your value as a person. This recognition often develops gradually as they observe your post-breakup growth, through social media, mutual friends, or occasional encounters. Instead of seeing you diminished by their absence, they witness you thriving in ways that contradict their narrative about being necessary for your well-being or their belief that you were too emotionally dependent to function without them. Your professional success, personal achievements, and visible happiness serve as evidence that contradicts their assumptions about your capacity and worth. When they observe you accomplishing goals, receiving recognition, or clearly enjoying your life, they're forced to acknowledge that they may have underestimated your value and potential. The development of new meaningful relationships, romantic partnerships that appear healthy and fulfilling, deepened friendships, or expanded social circles often triggers particular recognition because it demonstrates your ability to create connection with people who can appreciate and reciprocate your emotional investment. Seeing you valued and appreciated by others forces them to question whether they failed to recognize your worth. Your physical transformation, improved fitness, better style, increased confidence often serves as visual evidence of your growth and self-investment that makes them question whether they knew you as well as they thought. When you appear more attractive, confident, and vibrant without them, it challenges their assumption that you were diminished by their absence. Creative pursuits, educational achievements, or new interests that you develop post-breakup demonstrate depths of your personality that they may never have known or appreciated. This expanded version of yourself forces them to recognize that they may have interacted with only a limited version of who you actually are, creating regret about missing opportunities to know and appreciate your full potential. Geographic moves, career changes, or other major life transitions that appear positive and exciting force them to confront the possibility that their presence in your life was limiting rather than enhancing your growth and happiness. This realization can trigger genuine remorse about holding you back or failing to support your development. The social proof aspect becomes particularly powerful when they observe others celebrating your achievements, supporting your goals, or clearly enjoying your company in ways that highlight the positive impact you have on others' lives. This external validation forces them to question their own assessment of your value and their decision to let you go. Travel, adventures, and new experiences that you share publicly often trigger recognition because they demonstrate your capacity for joy, growth, and connection that exists independently of romantic relationships. Seeing you living fully and authentically forces them to confront whether they ever knew or appreciated the real you. The timeline aspect is also crucial. This recognition typically develops over 12 to 24 months as your growth becomes undeniable and their own life may have remained stagnant or less fulfilling. The contrast between your trajectory and their own often forces acknowledgement that losing you was a significant mistake. When this type of recognition occurs, their apology often includes admission that they undervalued you as a person, acknowledgement that they failed to appreciate your potential and worth, and genuine regret about missing the opportunity to share in your growth and success. This recognition is often the most authentic because it's based on concrete evidence of your value rather than just their emotional needs. 4. They experience consequences that make their loss undeniable and feel genuine regret. The fourth circumstance that forces avoidants to recognize their mistakes occurs when they experience direct consequences from their relationship patterns that make their loss undeniable and impossible to rationalize away. These consequences often accumulate over time and eventually reach a threshold that forces genuine self-reflection about their approach to relationships and the specific loss of your partnership. These consequences might include watching you enter a committed relationship with someone who can provide the emotional availability they couldn't, forcing them to confront that their limitations cost them access to your love permanently. Seeing you build the future with someone else that they were too afraid to create with you often triggers profound regret and recognition of their mistakes. Professional or social consequences can also serve as catalysts when their relationship patterns begin affecting other areas of their life. If friends, family members, or colleagues express concern about their emotional availability or relationship patterns, the external feedback can force self-reflection that they previously avoided. Health consequences: stress-related illness, depression, anxiety, or other physical manifestations of their emotional isolation can serve as undeniable evidence that their approach to relationships isn't serving their well-being. When their avoidant patterns begin affecting their physical health, they're forced to confront whether their emotional defenses are actually protective or harmful. Financial or practical consequences can emerge when they realize how much practical support and partnership you provided that they now must manage alone or pay others to handle. The increased difficulty and cost of managing life without a genuine partner often forces recognition of what partnership actually provides beyond emotional comfort. Aging often serves as a powerful catalyst for this type of recognition, as avoidants begin to confront their mortality and the prospect of facing their later years alone. The recognition that they may have wasted opportunities for deep connection and partnership often triggers genuine regret about their relationship choices. Watching peers build successful long-term relationships while they remain stuck in patterns of emotional isolation can force recognition of how their avoidant patterns have prevented them from achieving the kind of stable, fulfilling partnerships that others enjoy. This social comparison often creates motivation for genuine self-reflection. Legal consequences: divorce proceedings that highlight their emotional unavailability, custody disputes that focus on their relationship patterns, or other legal issues that force examination of their behavior can serve as external pressure that breaks through their usual defenses and forces accountability. Therapeutic intervention or personal growth work, whether voluntary or mandated, can force the kind of self-reflection that reveals how their avoidant patterns have harmed their relationships and specifically how they lost you through their own choices and behaviors. Professional guidance often provides the framework for understanding consequences they previously minimized or denied. Family consequences: children who become distant due to emotional unavailability, siblings who limit contact because of relationship patterns, or parents who express disappointment about their inability to maintain relationships can force recognition of how their avoidant patterns affect all their relationships, not just romantic ones. The accumulation of missed opportunities for connection, growth, and shared experiences often creates a weight of regret that becomes impossible to ignore when they consistently choose avoidance over connection and watch life pass them by. The consequences become undeniable, even to their defended psychology. When consequences force recognition, their apology typically includes acknowledgement that their behavior patterns are harmful and self-defeating, recognition that they chose their fears over the relationship, and genuine regret about the opportunities for happiness and partnership they destroyed through their own choices. Distinguishing genuine recognition from manipulation. Understanding these four circumstances helps you recognize when an avoidance apology represents genuine growth versus manipulation designed to regain access to your emotional resources. Genuine recognition includes several key characteristics that distinguish it from strategic attempts at reconciliation. Authentic recognition includes specific acknowledgement of their behavior patterns and their impact on you, rather than vague apologies or general statements about relationship mistakes. They can articulate exactly how their emotional unavailability, inconsistency, or withdrawal affected your well-being and the relationship's health. Genuine recognition involves taking full responsibility for their choices and their consequences without blaming relationship dynamics, your emotional needs, or external circumstances. They acknowledge that their avoidant patterns were their responsibility to address, and that they chose their comfort over the relationship's well-being. Authentic apologies include evidence of actual personal growth work, therapy, self-reflection, changed behavior patterns in other relationships, or concrete steps they've taken to address their emotional limitations. Promises of future change without evidence of current growth work typically indicate manipulation rather than genuine recognition. Real recognition often comes with understanding that their apology doesn't entitle them to renewed access to your life or guarantee that you'll give them another opportunity. They express regret about their mistakes without expecting specific responses or outcomes from you. Genuine recognition typically includes acknowledgement that they may have lost their opportunity with you permanently and acceptance that this loss is a natural consequence of their choices. They don't use their recognition as leverage to convince you to give them another chance. Authentic recognition often involves changed behavior toward others and in other relationships, demonstrating that their growth extends beyond their regret about losing you specifically. If they continue displaying avoidant patterns in other areas of their life, their recognition may be specific to missing you rather than genuine understanding of their relationship limitations. Most importantly, genuine recognition includes respect for your boundaries and decisions about whether to engage with their apology or consider reconnection. They understand that recognizing their mistakes doesn't obligate you to forgive them or give them opportunities to demonstrate change. The reality about avoidant recognition and apologies. While these four circumstances can force avoidants to recognize their mistakes and offer genuine apologies, it's crucial to understand several realities about this recognition that affect whether it represents meaningful change or temporary emotional disruption. Recognition of mistakes doesn't automatically translate into capacity for different behavior. Even when avoidants genuinely understand what they lost and why they lost it, they may still lack the emotional capacity necessary for healthy partnership. Insight and ability are separate qualities, and having one doesn't guarantee the other. The timeline for avoidant recognition is often years after the relationship ends, typically occurring when it's too late for reconciliation because you've moved forward with your life. This delayed recognition, while potentially validating, may not be practically relevant to your current circumstances. Some avoidants never experience these recognitions, regardless of consequences, because their defensive systems are too strong or their emotional limitations too severe. Waiting for recognition that may never come prevents you from moving forward with your own life and healing. Even genuine recognition may not lead to sustained behavior change without ongoing therapeutic work and commitment to personal growth. The same psychological patterns that caused their original avoidance often reassert themselves once the crisis or emotional intensity that triggered recognition subsides. Multiple recognitions and apologies without sustained change often indicate that the avoidant can intellectually understand their mistakes without being able to modify their emotional responses consistently. This pattern of repeated recognition without lasting change can become its own form of manipulation. The most important reality is that your healing and future happiness should not depend on whether an avoidant eventually recognizes their mistakes or offers apologies for their behavior. Your well-being must be based on your own growth and choices rather than external validation from people who have proven unable to appreciate your value when it mattered most. Understanding these circumstances and realities empowers you to recognize genuine change if it occurs while protecting yourself from manipulation and false hope. Whether an avoidant eventually recognizes their mistakes matters far less than your commitment to choosing relationships with people who can appreciate your value consistently rather than only after losing access to it.